The news reached Camp Swift on a warm Texas morning in May 1945. Germany had surrendered. Most prisoners felt relief instead of grief. They had already known the war was over long before the official announcement. Heinrich Müller sat quietly in his barracks that day. He thought about the train ride 2 years earlier. The lights outside those grimy windows had told him everything he needed to know about the war's outcome. Back in February 1943, those train wheels had clicked against steel rails. Müller pressed his face to the cold window glass. His breath fogged up as he stared into the American darkness. What he saw changed everything he believed about his enemy. Mile after mile, electric lights pierced the night like fallen stars. Entire cities blazed with power that made German blackouts seem foolish. Street lamps lined roads in perfect rows. Neon signs advertised products he'd never heard of. Factory smokestacks belched steam while their windows glowed bright. Müller was a captured Wehrmacht sergeant from the Afrika Korps. He'd spent 18 months fighting in North African deserts. There, fuel was rationed and electricity was hoarded like water. Now he was a prisoner on an American freight train. He watched a nation at war light up its cities like peace would last forever. How could they waste such energy while fighting on multiple fronts? He wasn't alone in his shock. Hundreds of other German prisoners packed the converted freight cars. Every man pressed against whatever window space they could find. Their faces showed the same mix of awe and disbelief. These were veterans of campaigns across Europe and Africa. Men who had seen the Third Reich's industrial might at its peak. Nothing had prepared them for this display of casual abundance. The America they'd been taught to expect was different. It was supposed to be a nation of soft civilians. Democracy and racial mixing had weakened them. They should be struggling with basic needs while sending troops overseas. Instead, they traveled through a landscape that pulsed with unlimited energy. Power lines stretched across vast distances like metal spider webs. They carried electricity to farms, factories, and cities with miraculous efficiency. Lieutenant Klaus Weber commanded tanks before his capture at Kasserine Pass. He later wrote about that first train journey. Fellow prisoners argued in heated whispers about the lights they saw. Some thought it must be an elaborate trick to impress prisoners. Others wondered if this was a special route to show off American wealth. The idea that this abundance was normal, everyday America was too much to accept. The scale of America's electrical system in 1943 was staggering by any measure. The Tennessee Valley Authority alone produced more electricity than all of Germany. The Rural Electrification Administration had spent a decade bringing power to farmhouses and small towns. Private utility companies had built capacity that dwarfed anything in Europe. They were driven by a consumer economy that treated electricity as a basic need, not a luxury to ration. But numbers couldn't capture the psychological impact of seeing this firsthand. These German soldiers had spent years where every kilowatt-hour was precious. Factory shifts were scheduled around power availability. Civilian lighting was severely restricted. The idea that a nation could fight a global war while leaving streetlights burning violated basic military logic. As trains carried prisoners westward, they began to understand something bigger. They weren't just seeing superior infrastructure. They were witnessing a completely different approach to warfare itself. American strategy wasn't based on the German model. Germany mobilized every resource for military production, while civilians made necessary sacrifices. America was built on a different premise. True strength came from supporting both military operations and civilian prosperity at the same time. The industrial cities of the Midwest revealed this philosophy in action. Chicago blazed with lights from steel mills working around the clock. They produced materials for Liberty ships and Sherman tanks. Detroit's car factories had converted to aircraft production without dimming a single street lamp. Pittsburgh's steel furnaces glowed against the night sky. Electric trolleys carried workers to and from plants that never stopped producing. Each mile of track delivered the same devastating message to German prisoners. They had been fighting an opponent whose industrial capacity was so vast it could afford to waste energy on an unimaginable scale. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. These weren't just soldiers seeing enemy infrastructure. They were believers in German superiority, confronting evidence that challenged their most basic assumptions. The transformation began before trains reached their destinations. Conversations among prisoners shifted from military tactics and hopes for German victory. Now they tried to understand what they were seeing with bewildered attempts. Veterans who had fought in Poland, France, and Russia struggled to reconcile their battlefield experiences. How could a nation with such overwhelming resources have struggled in early battles? How could Germany have hoped to win against such an opponent? The answer lay in understanding that American industrial might wasn't just about quantity. It was about a fundamentally different relationship between government, industry, and civilian society. Germany had built a war economy based on centralized control and civilian sacrifice. America had created a system that used free market competition and civilian prosperity to generate military strength. The lights burning in American cities weren't waste. They were evidence of an economy so productive it could afford both guns and butter without choosing between them. Camp Aliceville in Alabama housed nearly 15,000 German prisoners by summer 1943. It was larger than most German towns. The camp's electric lighting system alone used more power in a month than many German villages saw in a year. Every barracks blazed with fluorescent lights that turned night into day. Prisoners could read, write letters, and pursue hobbies long after sunset. Administrative buildings operated around the clock under electric lights. But it wasn't just the scale that stunned prisoners. It was the casual attitude Americans had toward this abundance. Sergeant First Class Jimmy Patterson was a guard from rural Georgia. He'd grown up without electricity until his teens. He thought nothing of leaving lights burning in empty rooms. He ran electric fans continuously during hot summer months. To him, electricity was simply there when needed. It was as reliable and abundant as the air he breathed. To prisoners like Heinrich Müller, who came from Germany where every kilowatt-hour was precious and carefully rationed, this casual waste was incomprehensible. Under the Geneva Convention, prisoners could work in non-military jobs. America desperately needed workers to replace millions of men serving overseas. German prisoners found themselves harvesting crops under electric floodlights that extended working hours well into the night. They loaded trucks at railway stations where every platform blazed with light. They worked in factories where electric power seemed so abundant that machines ran continuously even when not needed. Friedrich Steinberg was a former panzer mechanic from Munich. He was assigned to work at a lumber mill in Oregon. What he discovered there shattered his remaining illusions about American weakness. The mill operated 3 shifts around the clock, 7 days a week. It was powered by electricity from Columbia River hydroelectric dams. The lumber produced in a single week exceeded what similar German facilities might produce in a month. All of it was processed under electric lighting so bright that nighttime work proceeded as efficiently as daytime operations. When a transformer failed during Steinberg's second week, the mill didn't shut down to conserve electricity. Management simply called the local utility company. Within 6 hours, crews had installed a replacement transformer and restored full power. The idea that a single facility could command such rapid response was staggering. Spare transformers were available for immediate installation. This level of infrastructure backup was beyond German imagination. German prisoners on work details found themselves in small American towns where every home had electric lighting, refrigeration, and often multiple electrical appliances. Farmhouses in rural Kansas had electric milking machines and refrigerated storage. These would have been luxury items in urban Germany. Main Street businesses stayed open well into the evening under bright electric signs. They advertised everything from Coca-Cola to Ford automobiles with cheerful extravagance. This seemed to mock the austerity measures governing civilian life in Germany. These discoveries forced a fundamental recalculation of American industrial capacity. If small towns and agricultural states had electrical infrastructure superior to major German cities, what did that suggest about America's ability to sustain wartime production? Prisoners began to understand they hadn't just been fighting an enemy with superior numbers. They had been fighting an opponent whose civilian economy alone possessed greater industrial capacity than Germany's entire war machine. Lieutenant Weber found himself questioning everything during a work assignment at a railroad switching yard in Missouri. The yard operated under floodlights so bright that midnight looked like noon. Train operations continued around the clock with no reduction in efficiency. Freight trains loaded with war materials departed every few hours. Their destinations were marked on shipping labels that revealed the staggering scale of American production. Tanks bound for Britain, aircraft engines heading to Soviet Russia, artillery shells destined for Italy. All moved through a transportation network that never slept and never dimmed its lights. Weber's American supervisor was a railroad foreman named Michael O'Brien. His son was fighting in Italy. O'Brien explained that the switching yard's electrical consumption had actually increased since the war began, not decreased. Military shipments required additional lighting for security and efficiency. Civilian freight continued at pre-war levels to maintain home front morale and economic stability. The idea that a nation could simultaneously increase both military and civilian electrical consumption while fighting a global war violated everything Weber thought he knew. Some prisoners tried to rationalize what they were seeing. Perhaps this abundance was temporary. A final burst of consumption before American resources collapsed under wartime strain. Perhaps the electrical infrastructure was concentrated in special areas to impress prisoners. These hopes proved difficult to maintain as prisoners transferred between camps across the country. They encountered the same abundance in every location. The turning point for many came when they interacted directly with American civilians. These Americans displayed no sense of living under wartime restrictions or making significant sacrifices for the war effort. Their homes remained fully lit. Their businesses operated normal hours. Their conversations revealed a population that viewed wartime prosperity as normal and expected rather than remarkable. Sarah Martinez worked as a clerk at Camp Swift in Texas. To German prisoners like Corporal Hans Zimmermann, who'd been captured in Tunisia, Sarah represented something almost impossible to understand. She was a civilian whose wartime lifestyle exceeded what most Germans had enjoyed during peacetime prosperity. She drove her own car to work each day. She lived in an electrically lit apartment with modern appliances. She earned wages that let her buy consumer goods that had disappeared from German stores years earlier. What struck Zimmermann most was Sarah's attitude toward the war itself. She knew her brother was fighting in the Pacific. Rationing affected certain goods like gasoline and rubber, but she showed no sense of existential national struggle or desperate resource conservation. To her, the war was something America was fighting overseas while maintaining normal life at home. This perspective challenged everything Zimmermann had been taught about the relationship between warfare and civilian society. By early 1944, even the most dedicated Nazi believers among German prisoners found their faith in ultimate German victory severely shaken. The evidence of American abundance was too overwhelming and consistent to dismiss as propaganda. These men had seen firsthand that their opponent possessed not just superior resources. They had a completely different relationship between resources and society that generated abundance rather than managing scarcity. Some prisoners became deeply depressed. They recognized they had been fighting an unwinnable war against an opponent whose strength they had never understood. Others threw themselves into learning English and American customs. They already anticipated a post-war world where German influence would be small and American power would dominate global affairs. When Germany's surrender was announced in May 1945, many prisoners who had witnessed America's electrical abundance responded with relief rather than grief. They had already understood the war was unwinnable. Not because of battlefield defeats or tactical errors, Germany had chosen to fight an opponent whose civilian economy alone possessed greater capacity than the entire German war machine. The lights that first amazed them from train windows had illuminated American cities, but they also revealed the fundamental reality of American power. An abundance so vast and casual that it redefined what these men understood about the nature of strength itself.